Hello. Oh, that was leading. Welcome to Fear and Loathing in the Windy City. I'm your host, Jose Requena. Today, my guest, I have my guest and my guest co-host today, Kit Cabello.
Hey, how you doing, everyone? First, I want to just thank you for filling in for me for the last month, being a special guest co-host. You did a fantastic job. We talked earlier about how the show's going to be. I can't wait to talk because we got a lot to talk about. So everyone stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
Thanks, Kit. And it was really, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for asking me to step in. It was great learning. Check out Kit's Patreon videos from his trip in Japan. Mm-hmm. And so happy to have your help here today on my show. We have a special guest today, former candidate for the 15th Ward Alderman and co-founder of the 15th Ward IPO, Berto Aguayo. Thank you so much for sitting in on today's show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So we'll be talking with Berto soon, and we'll definitely ask you to weigh in on any of our stories that are coming up. But first and foremost, I did want to start off the show reminding our audience that Fear and Loathing in the Windy City, we are here to talk to you about Chicago politics and the Chicago machine, what they're up to, nuances, things that we hear on the ground, and how it pertains to the national election. First story off the bat is Marty Sandoval. Someone that we did a profile of in our first episode. You see a photo of him there and leaving the court after he pled guilty for taking bribes and and other corruption charges. Marty Sandoval is is embroiled in the middle of a corruption investigation that is also putting on the docket several other local officials that actually serve in smaller offices under his umbrella. So people like ASLEP Mayor John Ryan, Summit Mayor Sergio Rodriguez, the company Safe Speed, which probably will not gain any sympathy from our viewers. This is a company that instituted and ran the red light cameras all over the city, and they were expanding into the suburbs. So I don't think they're going to be the most sympathetic profiles, but they're all embroiled in this corruption case for bribing officials to get a leg up on instituting those cameras in suburban spaces. Marty Sandoval pled guilty. Luis Arroyo, another representative, Luis Arroyo, who was kind of on the outskirts of this investigation, pleaded not guilty, though he was expected to plead guilty. And again, during our profile of Marty Sandoval, we explained how he was a critical ally and maintaining and supporting Ed Burke, especially with his Latino base. Ed Burke, lives in a predominantly Latino district and area, and Marty Sandoval was a staunch ally of his. We did cover Ed Burke's FBI raid after it was discovered that Danny Solis was wearing a wiretap and recording several officials in City Hall. Ed Burke being the biggest person to be ensnared in all this, and now while that investigation is still unfolding, we are seeing that there are guilty pleas and other trials and other people being embroiled in this. And, Kit, we've talked about Ed Burke, we've talked about, Chicago machine politics, and we talked about how it seems strange that, Ed Burke got busted for shaking down a Burger King. Marty Sandoval, is on the hook for taking what some people would consider, not a whole lot of money in bribes from this red light camera.
Right. Well, I'm noticing how fast justice is, and I'm using quote-unquote justice, at least in this city, in regards to what's happening in Sandoval, because compared to Ed Burke, he's still in office, even though his crimes, what he has done, is outrageous. It's an insult to everything that's, decent about politics, and, Ed Burke is just running loose. He's still in power. I mean, you would assume if this was anybody else, they would resign right away. So it's interesting to see what else does Sandoval know in regards to how many people are involved in this, because when we look at the red light cameras, because, you mentioned how our audience, especially those who are Chicago-based, don't like the red light cameras. Well, see, what these red light cameras do, they don't add in revenue. What they do is they drain much needed income from other people. They don't work properly. I mean, what they're there to do is just target people, take away revenue, and it doesn't solve any problems at all. What these red light cameras do, they're a cancer among communities. They're not solving any problems. They're adding more problems to a system that's already corrupt, that's being run by corrupt individuals, which goes back to something I said way early on when I was still on the radio. And that is, we need to get involved in our municipal city elections. I'm going to say that again one more time. Get involved in your municipal city elections, because Everything that happens at the city level, county level, impacts us, because if we can't bring in much needed change in this city, how are we going to make an impact during midterm election cycles where state Senate or state House representative seats are up for grabs, or governor seats are up for grabs, or even going into federal elections? If we can't clean our own house here, how are we going to make a meaningful impact for other bigger elections? These municipal elections are key for us to implement real change, and we can get things done. Now, this last election cycle, there was a decent turnout, but not enough to overturn much of the city. And if we want to bring in change into Chicago, it requires all of us to step up and get involved, because otherwise we're going to have more people like Sandoval. There's people like him still in power all over the city. Yeah, great, we got rid of Sandoval, but there's thousands of more out there, whether they're holding key city positions or lower level positions. We got to bring in change. I don't mean to go on that rant, but I mean, we got to do it.
No, most definitely. And we will be talking about ward by ward, what you call it, power building, people-powered building, with Berto later on. But, I mean, I also have to point out, thank you so much for pointing out, Burke is still in office. He is still serving his role as alderman. Remember, he's an alderman. That means that he's a city council member. And Marty Sandoval is a state senator. Marty Sandoval's district is way bigger than Ed Burke's. And a lot of people underneath that district, both ASLAP Summit mayors, Cook County Commissioner Jeff Tobolsky, all underneath Sandoval's district. Burke, as the city council member, is still sitting in power. And it goes back to my theory of machine politics and how it actually works. Back then, I was kind of talking about how someone like, let's say, Danny Davis, who's a U.S. representative, is up for re-election every 2 years. He's constantly running for re-election. He's constantly looking to take money and to, be making sure that he's visible to his base. But the way that he locks up re-election and makes sure that he doesn't have to worry about challengers or being taken by surprise and unseated is to make sure that all the city council members, all the state senators, all the state reps, the Cook County commissioners, all the other seats that are underneath him that also have to run for office are good with him. And then those people that are winning their re-elections are going to win re-elections for Danny Davis, meaning that someone like State Senator Marty Sandoval needed to keep all these people happy in order to make sure that his seat was secure, all the other seats underneath him. Like now, someone like Ed Burke, who's a city council member, whose geography is smaller, you would think is a weaker player in this game. But, Burke overwhelmingly won his re-election, and he keeps his base happy. And he doesn't have to, keep anybody else underneath him happy. He just has to keep enough voters in his ward happy. He sits actually in the most powerful seat if he knows how to use it. And after 50 years, I think he figured out how to.
Well, actually, tell you the truth, the Burke family has been in charge of the 14th Ward for 75 plus years. Right. So this is how democracy works, everyone. Ed Burke inherited that seat from his father, basically. So you would think it sounds like a feudal kingdom almost, but this is what we have here in Chicago. And listen, everyone, I know that Chicago has problems, but if we just sit in our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it, then what does it say about all the people who have fought for freedom their entire lives, all the people who died dreaming for a better future? We have what it takes right now, at this moment. We have what it takes to bring in change. We can step up to the establishment. All it requires is people to step up and get involved. And do we have a corrupt system? Absolutely. But if we don't challenge it now, it will never change. And human beings, we as a people, we as a species, we have to fight. It's in our nature to fight. And this is wrong, what we see here in the city of Chicago. And the very fact that, let's talk about power and infrastructure. Ed Burke, let's be real about this, has a powerful political infrastructure, but that doesn't mean it's invincible. Right. Everything that is created can fall apart.
Right. No, and thank you so much. These people are extremely powerful. They're extremely connected. Yeah. And they're very comfortable in doing what they do, but they are not infallible. We're seeing, and this is also why the purpose of this show is to get our viewership in tune that, these power vacuums are happening in real time in Illinois, in Chicago, in the blue heart of the Midwest red. And but a lot of talk, and we will talk about the national election a little later and about corruption at that level and how this all trickles up. this is an opportunity, as Kit says, for us to step in, pay attention, be aware of these vacuums, of these things that are going on, to make sure that what's replacing them, what's happening, is done so transparently and with your input, democratically, ideally. How else to fix corruption other than to shine light on it? The FBI's way, I think, is rather slow going and really just acquiesces to other players already in the game to fill in the shoes of someone like Marty Sandoval and Ed Burke. I think with that, I think we can lead into our next story, because this is kind of, ramping up in terms of scale. John Cullerton.
Former president.
Former President John Cullerton, who in November asked for the resignation of Marty Sandoval, saying that he was, too much of a distraction, for the party, for him to do his services. It's funny that no one can do this to Ed Burke, but John Cullerton, who asked for the resignation of Marty Sandoval, himself had to resign from his position as Illinois State Senate President. And as his position as the state senator. This is after 40 years of being elected in office. He was first elected in 1978. Yeah.
Almost as long as Madigan.
Almost as long as Madigan. He had to wait much longer than Madigan for his, his leg up. In 1991 was when John Cullerton went from his initial elected seat to being appointed to the state senate. And then in 2009, he was appointed to be president of the State Senate of Illinois, to oversee the Blagojevich trial at the time. Governor Blagojevich famously was charged with corruption for trying to sell Senator Obama's seat. Well, he was President Obama, and he was trying to sell his Senate seat for a kickback. Blagojevich and Michael Madigan famously did not get along. In 2009 is when John Cullerton became president of the state senate and oversaw Blagojevich's trial, whether he should be taken out of office and thrown in jail for his bribery, which he was.
Which you could say was somewhat of a victory of justice, no matter how hypocritical it is, because just looking at just how you have the criminals judging the criminals, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Jury of his peers. Yeah. Blagojevich, for all the bluster, was found guilty by a jury of his peers, fellow Illinois politicians. But John Cullerton's resignation is part of this ongoing Illinois saga of corruption. A lot of this is tied to his cousin, Tom Cullerton, who is himself a state senator, and was embroiled with a corruption charge from Teamster boss John Coley. John Coley has been under the FBI's magnifying glass for his actions, for lying to them, for kickbacks, and during that investigation, they found that President John Cullerton's cousin was on the Teamster payroll. He made up to about $185,000 in salary and benefits, cell phone plans, and then about an additional $22,000 and medical payments, as well as other kickbacks for seemingly doing no work for the Teamsters. This connection seemingly, the way it looks from the outside in, and what the FBI seems to be trying to infer, is that this position with the Teamsters was a way for John Cullerton to also be acquiescing to their needs. So John Cullerton, Madigan's number 2 in state government, now resigned, and the Chicago Machine's musical chairs keeps going.
I think we're seeing something that maybe, I don't know, I don't want to predict the future because I could be horribly wrong about this, but maybe what we're witnessing is the beginning stages of the downfall of the Illinois Democratic machine. And mind you, this is a very successful political infrastructure that we see here. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say successful, I'm not saying that it's the best thing ever. No, but it is a machine in which those who are key power players in Illinois politics remain in power. And this is a machine that keeps on going. I mean, compared to the Illinois Republican political machine here, it's just nothing but a whimper. The DNC machine here in Illinois is well-oiled and well-maintained, but we're seeing cracks in it. Somebody like Ed Burke, granted, while he's still in power, is being investigated by the FBI. We're seeing Madigan also being investigated by the FBI. Cullerton right now, former president of the Illinois State Senate, has stepped down. He's out of office, and he's done for. So maybe this is the beginning. But what's going to require it is more public outrage, because how long should the people of Illinois be dealing with this corrupt system? And the Republican Party is just as corrupt as the Democratic Party. I don't want to hear this whole, well, this side's better than this. No, they're both the same. They're both leading into this corruption. And knowing that this is still going on in our state Senate, it explains the entire mismanagement of the state of Illinois, including a ridiculous tax code that we have here. Because the only way we can actually even have a progressive income tax is if the Illinois State Senate and House actually vote on amending the Constitution in the state, because we got a flat tax written inside our Constitution.
Right.
So that's how else we're going to bring in progressive change if we have these corrupt officials who are refusing to address an ongoing issue in our state, which is why we are so far behind compared to any other state in this country.
Yes. Thank you so much for succinctly putting that all together. The Illinois Democratic machine is an outfit. It's not a electoral body. It's a gang. The Republican Party is a much smaller gang, still a gang. But at the end of the day, if you're adhering to power, if you're adhering to money, it is the Democratic Party of, around Chicago that is your avenue into that world. Now, Michael Madigan, he has his patronage army. Ed Burke, they're investigating, the what you call workers' comp program. Streets and Sanitation, famously, a place for patronage jobs. These are kind of unspoken, known facts in Chicago. A lot of that was seen as communistic, socialistic by, Republicans, right-wing, free market advocates like Michael Bloomberg, who came in with his ton of money to help Ron Emanuel to convince Tony Preckwinkle to pass a soda tax and now run to president to take away marijuana from everyone. Chicago is a place where big money like Michael Bloomberg and his neoliberal ideas could be Republican one day, Democrat another day, and whatever.
Well, he's a Republican in a Democratic primary race, so wrap your heads around that one, folks.
Which also lets how true and dear to their values the Democrats are. Their two front runners supposedly are might be non-Democrats, Michael Bloomberg, Bernie Sanders. The Democratic machine, when it comes to Madigan, it's about his power, not so much the world making Sim City playing that Michael Bloomberg and his ilk like to do. But whatever it is, the point is that you, the people, don't have a say in what's happening. Illinois is losing population. It's one of the only states that's losing population. Chicago is one of the only major cities that's losing population. That's not by accident. Going back to the red cameras, and the fact that studies have shown that they're not as efficient, and they're really there to have regressive taxes on certain neighborhoods. More urban planning will show you that Chicago's gentrification has been planned for decades. We're losing population by design in very specific neighborhoods. And when the sea starts rising and condos along the coast of Florida, of South Carolina, of New Jersey, are no longer, habitable, where are people that have enjoyed prime real estate going to move to? People like Ron Emanuel and Michael Bloomberg have long planned for those people to move to Chicago. And our regressive property tax system is there waiting for all the, well-to-do people that can no longer live on the coast, within a decade's time, to be welcoming them with open arms. Of course, you're a city worker, you might, be able to hang on and enjoy the ride, which is the opposite of the patronage system. And we're going to go switch gears a little bit here, since I'm talking about kind of like big changes that are happening in the country, and touch a little bit on what's happening in Iowa. I feel like it'd be, it's a lot of local politics. Let's try to tie this to what's happening in Iowa right now. The caucus, just debauchery at the caucus, was on Monday. It was 3 days ago. We are still waiting for results. I feel like if we had used pen and paper, we'd probably have the results by now. We did not, apparently. We used an app. We used an app. What was it? Shadow Incorporated was the
Shadow Incorporated is what it is called. And the sad fact is, we're still waiting. It's almost 48 hours plus for us to get results on who's going to, win the most delegates. We already know who's got the popular vote. That's Senator Bernie Sanders. No debate about it. But the very fact that this happened, the whole world was watching. And this is American democracy at its finest. American democracy that is completely incompetent, where we have such an antiquated way where people are selecting delegates for all the candidates that are there. I'm going to include all the candidates. And of course, I want to be very clear. The rest of the candidates I don't really agree with. Bernie Sanders is my number one choice. I'm going to vote for him in our primary. But I want to make it very clear that here's what we were using. Put a little kettle corn inside a little bucket. Everyone stand on one side of the room. Other people stand on the other side of the room. Or do a horrible coin flip where you grab it, pretend you flipped a coin, and there you go. That's how you flip a coin. Really, that's what we have. That's how we're going to select our delegate. No wonder it was a complete disaster. And then the very fact that the app failed miserably, and at Bernie Sanders' campaign, their own app, and mind you, this is the campaign using their own app, was more authentic, more real to the numbers for their campaign, for their candidate, Bernie Sanders, and got in more accurate numbers than the DNC should. See, this goes to show you how incompetent the DNC in regards to picking a primary candidate is. They don't have the intelligence to really pull this off. And it calls into question on really how the rest of the primary will play off. Now, I want to be positive. Now, what do I mean by being positive about these results? Pete Buttigieg made a calculative error. Or he made a mistake. Let me stand corrected on it. He made a mistake. He made a premature victory speech, and the results are not in. 86% of the results are in right now. So waiting for 14% more to be pulled in. But as it stands there, tied with delegates, but I think that's BS. And I think also it's very important to note that, Bernie Sanders has a popular vote. But let's look at the bigger picture. Bernie Sanders is so powerful that the DNC is afraid of actually admitting it. And now even corporate media has to admit it. Yeah. Biden, their front runner that they've been promoting for years, not for years, but for the last year, was going to be the nominee, failed miserably. Mm-hmm. So I think at the end of the day, what's going to require for people not to see this mistake happen again is that that people are going to need to show out and turn up to vote, because I'm really concerned how this primary is going to turn out in Illinois. And something's going on there. We're
I'll
seeing.
let Kit deal with that. I can't see too far from here.
No, I cannot.
A poem.
A poem. A poem. Peter, Caucus cheater, knew that Bernie was the leader, bought himself a shady app, and think we'll all buy his victory crap. I love it. That is awesome. Nice. Okay, sorry about that, folks. But also real quick, too, Pete Buttigieg, he's connected to Shadow app. He's helped fund it. $42,500 of money that he traced to his campaign is connected to that Shadow app.
And let's not forget, we did have an in-depth look at Pete Buttigieg's connection to the Madigan's machine. One of Madigan's lobbyists for his law firm was there supporting Pete Buttigieg from the onset of his victory as South Bend mayor, introducing him to everyone from K Street, all the who's who of freshwater politics, to try to make Mayor Pete president. So there's a Madigan connection there too. We also see that Michael Madigan was a lot of his problems stem from having survived Bruce Rauner as governor, but he has survived Republican governors before. He wanted Blagojevich out. He couldn't work with Governor Quinn as well, and Ron wanted him out too. And I think Madigan was trying to pick his battles. We put all this in context, not to blatantly say that Shadow App Incorporated was a farce of a vendor for kickbacks and money, the way that Marty Sandoval's red light districts were, and not to say that the Shadow App was meant to make the election go a certain way for people that are used to controlling elections, like the people at K Street and people that work with Madigan, that Pete Buttigieg is connected to, and trying to run a information media campaign to normalize that idea. But if we were to say that it all kind of fits,
yeah,
Yeah, and
They
that's
made it look like a conspiracy.
Well, the thing is, too, we have to remember that the DNC also put $60,000 worth in cash into that app, too. And Nevada has dropped it. Everyone else is dropping that app. Buttigieg isn't the only one that's connected.
Biden
so
is,
is Joe Biden, but so is Kristen Gillibrand as well.
Oof.
They're connected to this
New York.
app, and it goes to show you just how everyone is connected with each other and how neoliberalism and these corrupt candidates are all working together to basically plan to deny Bernie Sanders a nomination. Now, it's not working. People are seeing through it, but don't get demotivated. Get angry and step up.
Thank
we
you.
can win this.
That's the message, because
Get angry.
Shadow app, bit on the nose. All of this, it's like they made it seem like a blatant conspiracy theory. If you're a disaffected voter that's been screwed by the Illinois Democrats time and time and time again, and no, you can't count on the Republicans for anything in your life, everything that's happening right now probably does not surprise you a least bit, and it convinces you that you're right not to participate and not to care about this process. You're not wrong, but again, that's what they want, and I think that's why it's so blatant. I think that's why go the extra mile and name your app something stupid and have Pete's. Whenever I see Pete Buttigieg, I don't know if you've read Transmetropolitan. It's a great graphic novel. Kind of covers a futuristic presidential election. The Smiler, he's a candidate that will look at the camera, speak from his heart, and just lie to your face. That's what we're seeing Pete is, and he's embroiled with people that depend on this working out, because we see that for some reason Nancy Pelosi ripping up a speech is what this type of establishment, these kind of insiders think is revolutionary or fighting back or enough substance to motivate people to stay engaged. I think there's a deep hubris within the Democratic Party that any of their candidates can defeat Donald Trump. That Pete Buttigieg walking in with no African American support, with the shady app, with the air of what you call delegitimacy, walking into the general will somehow beat Donald Trump. That Joe Biden, being held up, by two aides, on either side can somehow defeat Donald Trump. That Michael Bloomberg, that somehow him overbuying the seat is going to be enough to get some of that Republican support to defeat Donald Trump. This is the kind of hubris that has, worked out for players that have been in the game as long as John Cullerton for 40 years, as Michael Madigan for almost 50 years, as Ed Burke for almost 50 years. This type of hubris has always worked out in their favor. It's not these days, and they're going to take us with them, is the danger that we're in right now. The Chicago machine does have a target on their back. What's replacing them might not be any better, not if we're not engaged. And what's happening now with the national election seems to be very much about getting people disengaged. Now, we don't have so much time left to. We can probably keep ranting about Iowa and the national election so much. I did want to bring this back to doing something positive at the local level, getting young people involved, putting that energy into good use. A lot of things are happening in the 15th Ward. So I would like to bring Berto, if you'd like to kind of introduce yourself to the crowd. Tell us a little bit about how you ran last time. I know you've been a guest on Hardlands, but for our benefit, if you can kind of let us know so much about what's going on in the 15th Ward and your role there.
First of all, thank you guys very much for having me. And I want to give a shout out to Armando Romero if he's watching, because I know he's a huge fan of the show.
Nice.
And to Jesus Hidalgo, who's also here with us today, who's now going to be a big fan of the show, hopefully after this interview.
Okay, great.
Right? So I ran for alderman in the 15th Ward in the last election. Before then, I was a community organizer. We started an initiative called Increase the Peace, where our idea was, how do we engage young people in the fight for peace in our communities? So we trained hundreds of young people in community organizing and the basics of community organizing, and then we just gave them the autonomy to go do peace actions all across the city of Chicago. More famously, we were known for doing overnight campouts, which were campouts that were from 5 p.m. to 5 in the morning, strategically hitting spots that were marked by scenes of violence often, right? So we would go to the most violent corners in the city of Chicago, and our youth would organize overnight campouts to do positive loitering, but also to create a platform for relationship building.
You say positive loitering.
Yeah. So basically, what we would do is we'd have DJ come through. We'd have a banda sometimes come through. People playing loteria all night long, almost like what you see in a like in Mexico, right, where people know each other and neighbors know each other.
Yeah.
That's what we seeked out to do, and people would show up. Hundreds of people would show up to our campouts. Some of them lived right next to each other, and they had never met each other until the campout, right? So our idea was, how do we activate youth to take over their streets, and that's what we did. But then also, how do we provide a platform for neighbors to get to know each other, to get to build relationships, so that way they feel empowered by each other and not by any institution. So then, as we were doing that, we had an alderman that was very antagonistic.
I did want to touch on that. It seems like you were driven to do all this out of necessity in the 15th Ward. For people that don't know, the 15th Ward in Chicago covers a lot of neighborhoods. Primarily, kind of has a cross between Inglewood and Back of the Yards. Two very different neighborhoods that have a lot of similar problems and have one alderman, Ray Lopez. And why did the youth have to step up and do all this? Why wasn't Ray Lopez doing anything?
Yeah, so Ray Lopez was an individual who he saw the young people on the street as the problem, and he didn't see them as a symptom of the much larger root causes of the issue, right? So you look at a community like Back of the Yards, and you see there's high levels of unemployment. In Back of the Yards alone, there's 5,000 young people between 16 and 24 that don't have a job, and they're not in school. So think about it, 5,000 young people that just have nothing to do, right? That's one. You have super low income levels. You have low education access, right? There's not a lot of great schools around. There's not a lot of after school programs.
Right.
So he doesn't understand those things, and he thinks, it's the youth, it's the parents. I think a couple weeks ago he wanted to create a child tax for any parent who wanted to have a tax.
Oh my God.
Right? So it's outrageous things. And on the ground, what he was doing, we would ask for a street, we would partner up with a priest to do a street mass after somebody was shot. He denied a Catholic priest a permit because he was working with us and he saw us as a threat.
Oh my God. And I just want to add one quick quote from Ray Lopez. There was a gang shooting in the park. Many youth were injured and some were killed, and because there was gang affiliation.
Yeah, and actually it was a memorial. So somebody was shot the day before.
Yeah.
People were gathering for a memorial, and people get shot with an AK-47. About 7 people are shot, 2 are killed. One of them is a pregnant mother.
Oh my God.
He comes out and he says, "Thank God no innocent lives were lost here."
No innocent lives.
Okay,
Yes.
so here's the thing where people why I say people got to get mad and get involved in this election, especially when it comes down to municipal city elections, because when you have politicians like this who callously say something so inhuman, this is somebody that's supposed to represent you in the city council. They don't care about you unless you step up. You got to start pushing back. And we got to remember too about all the young people right now. It's not like a young person wakes up one morning and says, "You know what? I'm going to be a menace to society. You know what? One day I'm just going to cause problems." No. What young people want is the opportunity to expand their minds, to be given a chance to make something of themselves. But the system that we have is denying young people, especially here in the city, the much needed resources to compete not only at the city level, but on the national level and international level. We are hurting our own. The young people are going to be replacing us. I mean, right now we're like 30 between ages 30, 35, 36, go figure.
25.
25. All right, 25 right there. But
enjoy them.
Nonetheless, I mean, we can't be running the show forever. We have to make room for the next generation. And the next generation has to be just as smart, or if not smarter, more capable, more able to understand how the world works, and contribute,
And we gotta pay it forward.
and work together. So the thing is, you have an alderman right now in power that does not care. That doesn't care that people are dying in his streets that he is supposed to represent. Who does not care that a young woman who was pregnant has died, and yet he says, "Thank God no innocent lives were lost." people deserve second chances.
Anyone with
People
gang
deserve a
affiliation.
chance. I don't mean to rant, but
Yeah.
the thing is, I remember us talking
Yeah.
way back in 2018 when I was still on the radio
Yeah.
about how you want to bring in much needed change into the,
Yeah.
into your district. And the thing is, we need young people like yourself. You're 25. You were stepping up, going against a seasoned alderman
Yeah.
who's been in power probably for far too long.
Yeah.
So I think really what I want to ask you is just a follow up. What were some of the things that you learned? Especially during that election cycle, because I know that it
Yeah.
must have been a whole big education right there.
It was a huge education. I think I learned more running for alderman in my 4 years of college. But you know, like initially I had ran because, you know, like as you said, second chances are important to me. You know, I was a gang member when I was a teenager, and somebody gave me an opportunity. I had a village that really cared for me, and I was able to go to college and do all these amazing things. So I know how our young people were struggling, and I know those root causes, and I wanted to be somebody that I might have needed when I was younger and create those opportunities for more people to be like that. And I think when I ran for alderman, I really learned that the power of money in politics right now, right? We set out to run, and I didn't run alone. You know, I conferred with kind of the young people that we had been working with parents, talking about should we do this, and we decided to do it together. And at our launch, we had our campaign launch was a peace march, 300 people, you know, just coming together and doing a peace march to launch our campaign. And we had two underlying philosophies that guided what we did. One was, no matter what, we always have to do the right thing. Right. And then the second one underlying that one was, we can't become the people we are running against. We can't become we can't use the same tactics that our oppressors are using to oppress us, right? And one of the things to answer your point is, I learned the value of money because we had people coming into our campaign office, people that I can't name names, but people that are now under investigation that came to, you know, partner up and give us, you know, $55,000. And I had I raised $15,000 in my campaign, right? So that would have done a lot, right? But I didn't want to sacrifice my values or my integrity for the sake of winning an election. And even though we had $15,000, and my two opponents who were backed up by local politicians and by, you know, the other one members of the machine, they had $250,000 or more, and we came within 200 votes of going into the runoff.
I remember covering that.
Why-
I was rooting for you.
Yeah.
I was, but man, that was a close one too.
And I think like that speaks to the people power that you're talking about, right? Like that, if with that huge of a margin of difference, we were able to come that close, then man, we can do, like, now I know a lot more than I did when I ran, and I think we can do a lot more good just with the know-how.
Yeah, and to go back a little bit about machine politics and the role that a congressional seat needs seats underneath them to work with them.
Yeah.
A figure does play kind of heavily in a lot of these stories. And in your story as well, I mean, you know, you said you were trying to fight the machine, and Ray Lopez, an alderman that, you know, you grew up under, that has been very antagonistic to you young people. But you also had another opponent that you mostly dealt with for a long time. You know, what you call a good candidate in his own right, Rafa Yanez, but he was backed by Jesus Chuy Garcia, a congressman of the 4th District. How was running against Chuy's progressive machine?
Well, I mean, you know, I think it was hard knowing that, you know, like, because Rafa and I would go back, you know, we were friends before I ran, and I respect him as a person. And unfortunately, we were in the unfortunate circumstance of having to run in the same race against each other. But, you know, I respected Chuy's decision. I thought, okay, you're not going to support us. That's cool. I will say, though, that one of the things that I was disappointed at was, in that campaign, some of those volunteers, some of the volunteers of the Rafa campaign were utilizing the same tactics that Lopez was. They were going into telling one gang that I was part of another gang.
Ouch.
And I had to wear a bulletproof vest on election day. And the first encounter that I had with a volunteer was from a Rafa campaign volunteer saying he was going to shoot me twice because he thought I had taken down his signs. So, you know,
Lovely
like,
Chicago.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think it was hard to have all of those dynamics at play. But I think sometimes it was more disappointing for me to see that some of those volunteers from that campaign were utilizing some of those tactics, when most of our volunteers were parents and youth, and we thought we were allies. And it was really it was frustrating to say the least.
Yeah, Chuy Garcia has allies, all over the city. I'm good friends with many of them. There's many good people that have been there since, Chuy's been doing what he can for independent politics. It just seems, though, that, in your race in the 25th Ward and other races, I don't think that and many people that he backed in the 2019 race did so well.
Yeah, but I think even though I might not have agreed with his decision in our race particularly, right, I still think I look at everything through its context, right, and not, I think sometimes we see frames in time of like Chuy in the last year, for instance, and the decisions he made in our race. But I also know that like he has a long tradition and history of being involved in independent politics, right? Like he was one of the co-founders, right? I think of the 22nd Ward IPO.
Right. Definitely his base of operations now.
Yeah. So I think my hope is that somebody like him, he's in a unique position to continue that and to keep continuing that leadership pipeline that Kit was talking about. And
is he, though? I mean, like, he has not endorsed Marie Newman in the 3rd District, who's running against Dan Lipinski, who sits on the Transportation Committee that now Chuy Garcia as well sits on. He's not endorsed Bernie Sanders, who endorsed him for mayor in 2015. And after Chuy took a deal to become congressman from Madigan, Bernie came and gave him progressive cover by endorsing him for that, saying that he's a very good man. I know the 22nd Ward IPO voted recently to whether to endorse in the presidential election. No idea how they came down to that. I know Mi Gente had similar things. Where is you're a co-founder of the 15th Ward IPO.
Yeah,
I did want to talk a little bit more about that. But how does the 15th Ward IPO see their relationship to Chuy Garcia and the 22nd Ward IPO?
Yeah. So the 15th Ward IPO, although it's we're being more active now, closer to election day. The decision to form the IPO was literally a day after my race, and Jesus was there. But on the 27th of February of last year, after losing a race, and anybody who's been a candidate can attest, is like the most, not horrible thing that could happen, but the most horrible thing in a career, I think, that could happen, right? Because you're losing publicly. You pour your heart into a race, and then you lose. But we wanted to make sure that my race was not just about me. It was about creating other leaders and creating a movement for change in our neighborhood.
Right.
So then
you famously endorsed Rafa Yanez. And
we endorsed Rafa, right? Despite all of the tension. And the next day, we got together with our base of volunteers and we said, how do we move this movement forward? So we voted on two things that day. We voted to try to Increase the Peace as its own 501c3 to continue the community building work that we needed to do, but also to create a political vehicle for change to continue independent politics in our ward, and also to hold individuals accountable that are not doing their job, like Ray Lopez. Yeah. So we formed this IPO, and the way I see our relationship to any individual is we were independent when I ran. We ran against... I don't think we had any establishment support whatsoever, right? And I don't think a lot of people, I was telling you earlier on the show, a lot of people say, I think there's a difference between being independent and being progressive. And I think when you're independent, that means you don't rely on anyone, right? And that you don't depend on the same people who might be perpetuating the problem, right, to run or to be engaged. And I think progressive is an individual who believes and who sees the root cause of the issues, who sees the systemic injustices, right? But not all progressives can say they're independent and vice versa, right?
I appreciate you adding clarity to those words.
Right?
Just kind of thrown around, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way I see our IPO is we were independent when I ran, and we're independent now, right? We just had an endorsement process where we invited candidates to say their piece to our base. And I don't have a vote because I'm the chair, so I don't have a vote in the process. But we had them come out, they said their piece, and our base voted for them, right? Regardless of affiliations. We actually endorsed people that had opposed us when we ran, and we still endorsed them because we thought they were still the better candidate. So I hope that answers your question about relationships. And
yeah, I mean, it seems like you're building power mostly, for young people to have their voices heard, because they're not. And it seems like you're getting attention. Ray Lopez recently had a Facebook post
oh my God.
That someone felt the need to share with me.
Yeah.
Because people gossip, and that's all that politics seems to be.
Yeah.
But he was calling out the IPOs, independent political organizations, the IPO movement being an extension of a different machine kind of politics, kind of targeting Chuy Garcia there. He some of his people have touched upon the fact that we mentioned Danny Solis and his wiretapping with the FBI was kind of a key figure that helped Chewy's ascent to Congress and brokered a super PAC or a PAC, a slush fund, Latino Victory Fund. Lots of capitalist money from Latin America coming in to elect people into office. Maybe people that support Donald Trump have a problem with that, but people that abhor machine politics also are a bit miffed about it. Ray Lopez famously outside of this new circle and seems to be targeting you about it.
So I'll tell you why he's upset. He's upset because one of my field director, Edgar Flores, as I said before, like our campaign was never just about me. Like it was really my idea. Like we don't want to become the problem that we're trying to solve, and we got to create more leaders. And I think one of the problems specifically in Latino communities is that sometimes we don't have a great leadership pipeline, right? So one of the things that we decided at our IPO is we need to be different than that. So we voted to endorse and nominate Edgar Flores, my field director, to run against Ray Lopez for committeeman.
Nice.
Okay.
So he's running.
Wow.
So he's running against him for committeeman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we got the signatures, and this kind of exemplifies and is a testament to our independent power base. We got the signatures to get him on the ballot in a week and a half.
Nice.
Right? And some aldermen, as you know, in the city, didn't even make it on the ballot because they couldn't get enough signatures. So we have a bigger power base in our independence than some aldermen.
Right, and see, that's how it should be because, I think for the most part, when people think about politics, specifically here in Chicago, we think of, oh, well, it's such a mess. I mean, I can't clean this up. Well, in fact, the exact opposite should be, oh, my God, this is a mess. It's going to take some time to clean it up, but it can be done. And that's some of the things that we need to see with a lot of independent organizations. More importantly, keep on knocking on more doors so that more people come to these to your events so we can know, okay, well, who's going to come in here and fix our problems? Because the current management is doing a horrible job. But that's a common story all over Chicago, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think one of the things in Chicago specifically is that there's a lot of activists, but not a lot of organizers.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that those two things are also different. Like independent and progressive are different. An activist is somebody who shows up and is active. Right? An organizer is somebody who shows up with 3-5 other people, right, and brings other people along with them in the journey, right? An activist sits at a table, an organizer brings others to that table, right? And I think if a lot more of us were organizing, then I think more of us could be independent and not have to make questionable decisions.
Yeah,
right?
there's so much more that I want to talk to you about, but we are kind of getting close to time. If I can just extend for like 5-10 more minutes, what you call it? Of course, I would love to have a conversation about issue organizing and political organizing, the differences there. But I did want to touch a little bit first on what you said, a pipeline of leadership for Latinos in Chicago, political leadership. We do have the Latino Caucus that has a pipeline to this Latino Victory Fund money. There seems to be a lot of big moves within Latino politics in Chicago. Ray Lopez is the only other alderman that has an armed guard with them at all times besides Ed Burke. It seems like the pipeline for Latino leadership, whether it was Danny Solis or Ray Lopez or what have you, used to be through Ed Burke. That's kind of opening up now. Do you think that means that opening now has to go through Chuy Garcia, or can Latino step up into power on their own?
Oof, that is a heavy question.
We're not gonna take it easy on you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe my girlfriend tells me all the time, like, oh, you always see the good in people, and like, I think maybe that might be my issue. But I do think, nobody's infallible, and I think, again, as somebody who ran against a true candidate, somebody who was on the other end, I understand the criticism, and I also understand like the history of independent politics in the Southwest side, and that he's, without talking about Chuy Garcia, like he's a big component of that independent political history in the Southwest side. And my hope would be that he creates that leadership pipeline that we might not have right now. How that looks like, that's for another conversation.
Okay, so it is going to go through Chuy, but it might not be so bad. I mean, that's more optimistic than I have.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that, because when we talk about like people like Madigan, Burke, Tobolsky, right? It really angers me that when we talk about right, just talk about systemic racism, right? Sandoval's in jail, and Burke, Tobolsky, and all of them are still out here, right? And
True.
I like to give a Latino the benefit of the doubt that's been given to people like Madigan for so long, right? That's been given to all these other white individuals who have been just different imitations of the Chicago machine. And I would hope that, you know, having a history like Chuyo running against a machine for so consistently, that he would be conscious enough to create that leadership pipeline that hasn't existed in the Southwest side for Latinos.
Now, Chewy did suffer during his mayoral run by not having enough African American support in the city. And there's a lot of narratives out there that the ascent of Latino politics through machine figures like Burke and Madigan has been at the expense of independent African American political power in, you know, a city that, you know, was famous for it.
Yeah.
You know, the 15th Ward has Inglewood and Back of the Yards.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could speak to any.
I'll give you a canvassing story, right? Knocking on doors. I remember Miss Gloria. I was knocking on doors, and this is a response you'd get often. I'm not voting for a Mexican, right? And you guys are coming over here taking our jobs, taking our houses. Nope, I'm not voting for a Mexican. And like, you guys are always taking our jobs. And I told her, like, I think you're right. And then she was just like, you know, she was taken aback, like, I'm right? And then I said, yeah, I think you're right. I think that, but it's not because, and I told her about my tia, like, it's not because I have people in my family that work with black colleagues, right? And it's not, my aunt doesn't work because she's trying to take away your job. And it's because employers are trying to just look for the people that they can exploit the most. And that's why jobs are being lost so badly. When you're thinking about Latinos moving into the neighborhood and them kicking African Americans out the neighborhood, it's not because we're coming over here intentionally, hey, let's take over this neighborhood. It's because the housing market is so bad that it's exploiting our people, because those people that are moving in here are moving and being kicked out from somewhere else. Right? And I think if, you know, black and brown folks, we can get together and educate ourselves about those issues, and how if we unite for a $15 minimum wage for everybody, not just for some and not for others, if we band together for rent control and other kind of big issues that will limit people being kicked out of their neighborhoods, then that would be a way better thing to do than blame each other for the problem of each other. Because, and I remember when I was running, we brought black and brown folks together just for a circle, right? And I remember we talked about the myths, right, and about how we feel about each other. And I remember an African-American young man, he said, oh, we feel like Latinos got it together. And then I translated, and then all the parents were like, we got it together? You think we got it together?
We're a mess.
You know, and it's like each side thinks each other has it together, when the reality is none of us have it together. But if we band it together, we might have it together.
And much like our two-party system, it seems like people keep getting split up by the people at the very top of power.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, always be careful of those in power that say that the other person, the person who's just in your same situation, is taking away your power. When in fact,
Ray Lopez.
look at to the top. Don't look at the bottom. Look at the top and who is dictating these terms. It goes for all these people at the top 1%, whether they're a political establishment leader or some billionaire that doesn't pay taxes. Jeff Bezos.
He's one of many.
He's one of many.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is the problem that we have. And people realize just how easy it is if we all band together and we fight for this better future, it can be done. It's not going to be easy, but it can be done.
And leading to that, I want to ask you: Are you personally endorsing, anyone in the presidential election?
Actually, I did last week.
Right.
I endorsed Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, let's go.
And it's, do you think, are you endorsing him because you think he's the best candidate for Latinos? He's the best candidate for the 15th Ward? Do you just like him nationally, or what message do you want to say to young people?
I think it's a combination of, every time I make a decision, I try not to make it alone. I try to consult with the base, right? And I think that's how leaders should be held to account, right? Consulting with a base of people. And our 15th Ward IPO voted to endorse Bernie. And I remember after I ran, I had some free time, so I started reading a lot. I read Warren's book, and then I read Bernie's book, Our Revolution. And what really drew my attention from that book is how many times he had lost.
Right.
And I was like, he would talk about why he had lost is because of the same reason that I lost, because I wasn't willing to sell out to the highest bidder. And that really resonated with me. Before, I knew Bernie was independent. I just didn't understand the importance of being independent in politics until I ran myself, and how it's so easy to sell out to the highest bidder, how easy it is to say, yeah, I'll take your money, right? And for those people to expect a favor in return. So when I read that book, I thought, this is a person that I trust the most to do what he thinks is right and not to owe anybody favors, because he has an independent power base that contributes daily to his campaign. He's like literally funded by the people. I think he has the most individual contributions than anybody else.
In the history of presidential elections.
History of presidential elections. And he's one of the people that I trust the most, not to rely on the whisperers or the advisors or the people that we don't see behind the scenes that sometimes are pulling the strings of a people to judge or of a Joe Biden. And ultimately, that's why I decided to endorse him. And I think
over Elizabeth Warren.
I think, I actually would be happy with an Elizabeth Warren. I just think I appreciate Bernie's independence a lot more, right? And I think it goes back to my original point about the difference between an independent and a progressive, right? I think Warren is progressive.
Wow.
She is. But I think Bernie is progressive and he's independent, which to me, having run my own race, means a lot more, because that means that when he gets in power, he's not going to back down on his promises the way other candidates have done in the past.
That's a good note.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much,
Thank
Berto,
you.
for coming on the show, talking about the 15th Ward Independent Political Organization, endorsing Bernie Sanders and why. Please check out our show next week. We'll have a different candidate that's currently running for office. But again, from Fear and Loathing in the Windy City, thanks so much for tuning in. And we'll be here to keep informing you about everything the Chicago Machine is up to that they don't want you to know. Thank you.
Take care.